You know what? You'll probably never hear me quote Malcolm X again. But only a fool allows his children to be educated by his enemy. There's a lot packed into this episode of Off the Cuff. Stay tuned for more. Welcome to episode 3 of Off the Cuff. This week we're continuing our study, our look at what it means to put God first. What does that look like in our day and age? But in order to get there and to understand what putting God first looks like in our time, we're going to take a look in the past, a specific look at Daniel and his interactions as a Hebrew in the land of Babylon. He was a foreigner, but he was influential. And a lot of times as Christians today in American culture, Christians can feel like foreigners. We can feel out of place in a culture that is living contrary to what we know we should be living. So a culture is living contrary to what we know we should be living. That can lead to some very awkward moments. We're going to be looking in the first chapter of the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel is found after the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament. Along the timeline we're looking at about the year 605 BC. 605 BC is when King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonian Empire overthrew or took over the land of Judah that the Hebrews were living in. I want you to do your best to picture the setting that they are in. They are basically prisoners of war. Daniel would be a prisoner of war as the Babylonians would besiege the land of Judah in 3 different waves. The first wave, they came in, they conquered a good bit, and they took a lot of prisoners of war. They took the best and they took the brightest and they took them back to the land of Babylon. And so let's look with me in the first chapter of the book of Daniel. And you'll see that in verse 3 that the king commanded one of his chief eunuchs to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of nobility. He was looking precisely for youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge. He was looking for smart people, looking for bright people, looking for beautiful people. He was looking for the best of the best, the cream of the crop. And so King Nebuchadnezzar, he wanted them. What did he want them for? What did he want them for? Well, you'll see it if you keep reading in verse 5. It says that he wanted to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. And so he was looking for people to train. He was looking for people to educate. He was looking for people to serve basically in his cabinet. You see, as the Babylonians were taking over and building their empire, essentially what they were trying to do was integrate other people groups into their empire. Why might you do this? Well, it's a military tactic today. You win the hearts and minds of people. And as you win the hearts and minds of people, what happens is they oppose you less. They put up less of a fight when you have won their hearts and minds. And specifically, if you win over the children, it means one day you'll stop there. Well, it means that one day there won't be such a big pushback for what you're trying to do. That's what the Babylonians were attempting. They were attempting to win the hearts and minds of the Hebrews that they had captured so that hopefully they wouldn't give them much opposition as they continued to build their empire. And they really set their eyes upon the children, because if you win the next generation, then one day it means that there will be peace. There'll be peace. And so that's what they were looking for. And it says that they were educated for 3 years. And at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. And so the king would take many youths, and he would take the best and the brightest, and he would educate them. And they would do their best to really just indoctrinate them with the literature and the culture and the language that the Babylonians had. That was the plan here. And if you know anything about the book of Daniel or the life of Daniel, what you know is Daniel didn't just go along to get along. He lived life according to his conscience, and he lived life according to the faith that he had. You see, they tried to bring the Hebrews into the Babylonian culture. But the thing about Daniel and some of his friends is Daniel's faith wasn't dependent upon his circumstances. You see, Daniel's faith was a part of him. And so no matter what they tried to do, no matter how they tried to indoctrinate Daniel or change Daniel, they couldn't change his heart because his faith had taken root deep down within him. One thing that sticks out to me about this particular passage is that school choice is important. And we're beginning to see how important school choice is in our own culture. You see, school or education, it's a powerful tool for influence. It's a very powerful tool for influence. Who the teachers and educators and professors are will directly impact the next generation. And we're seeing that played out in our culture today. You see, one thing I want you to be aware of is a term called generativity. Generativity is essentially what adults seek later in their life. You see, as we get older as adults, we begin to realize that we're not going to be able to leave money behind. We're not going to be able to leave success behind. We're not going to be able to leave any of the material possessions that we accrue in this life behind. We're not going to be able to take those things with us or really leave them to other people. They're not going to serve our purposes once we cease to exist on this planet. And so what do adults do? What do humans do as they go on in their life or into their elder years? They seek generativity. Generativity is the influence that you have upon the next generation. You see, ultimately, as we get closer to life's end, what people realize is that the only thing that really matters is the influence that you had upon the people that were in your sphere of influence. And let me tell you something. Teachers don't make a lot of money. The teachers aren't paid very well. People that are in the line or in the work of teaching, they're not doing it for the money. It can be quite a headache sometimes. It's not an easy job. What are they doing it for? They are doing it to influence the next generation. And depending on how you as a parent are trying to raise your children or your grandchildren, depending upon how you are trying to raise your children or grandchildren, that can become quite a conflict. Because there are teachers, there are educators out there that have a completely contradictory worldview from what we as Christians have. And so school choice is important. Adults are seeking generativity, and really there's no such thing as a neutral education. It's very difficult to keep the teacher's worldview or to keep the teacher's perspective out of the classroom. Now, worldview is important. Education is hardly neutral. It just doesn't happen. They're either going to be influencing them one way or the other way. It's very difficult to pull that bias, that perspective, that worldview out of the classroom. And so as we continue to read through the book of Daniel, I want you thinking about the choices that Daniel made to honor God.